Time for another video. Hello, this is What's with People with Doc Locke. I'm Dr. Stephanie Lockmuller, and today we will be talking about the question, what's with people being wrong? The sequel! Why do people make so many errors when making judgments and decisions? Are we rational beings, or are we just prone to making mistakes? Oh, we do try our best, don't we? We want to believe that we are rational, logical, reasonable beings. After all, we are the smartest animals on the planet with our big buildings and cars and internet and this USB-powered mini fridge for your office desk. So smart, so convenient. Humans are so smart that we have smart humans that study how smart humans are, like psychologists. Social psychologists for decades have been studying the ways that humans make decisions and judgments, and there are two ways in which they have historically approached this subject. Using the normative decision theory, which emphasizes what people should do if they are rational, reasonable beings, and using the descriptive decision theory, which studies what people actually do. In the early years of research on this topic, researchers used the normative perspective to study human decision-making and judgments, believing that humans were logical and thoughtful in the way that they processed information. But in 1956, Herbert Simon came up with the term bounded rationality, a differing perspective that describes people as having inherent limitations in their abilities to be rational in their decisions, and that people don't do a full analysis to figure out the best decision, either due to time constraints or how difficult or complex the decision is, or the thinking abilities of the person making the decision, or even the emotions that are involved. And so it was around this time that the focus of research used the descriptive perspective to look at the actual behavior of people processing information within those limitations. In other words, if people are limited, maybe we aren't always rational in our judgments. Now, I know, we don't like to think of ourselves as limited. We like to think that we are always conscious of our thoughts and decisions. Well, sorry to break it to you, we don't actually control all of our thoughts as much as we think that we do. When we need to spend a lot of time and effort on making a decision or judgment, we can, thanks to our big wrinkly brains. I like my wrinkles on my brain, not on my face. Thank you so much. But if we need to make decisions quickly and without effort, or maybe we just don't need to care enough, or we don't want or have the ability to put in a ton of effort, our big old brains can actually take over for us automatically. In other words, based on how much time and effort and how important it is to us, we have two ways of thinking or processing information, either fast or slow, aka dual processing theory of human cognition, if you fancy. Slow, aka in-depth, aka systematic thinking, aka system 2, is the deliberate and controlled way of processing information, like when we spend time and effort into thinking about stuff. Like when you're in the middle of the night and you're trying to go to bed and yet you're analyzing every single conversation that you had that day or will have the next day. Anxiety. We use this way of thinking when we have important decisions or judgments to make, and we have the time and ability to think it through, like deciding where you want to eat for dinner to which college you want to rack up thousands of dollars in loans to. I mean, in which you want to spend your years learning. But most of the time, we actually function on autopilot, not putting in a ton of thought into everything that we say and do and think, which is where most of the mistakes or errors in our judgment happen. This is the fast way of thinking, aka fast and frugal, aka superficial thinking, aka system 1, or the quick and automatic and involuntary way of processing information. But there is good reason why we rely so heavily on our autopilot or fast thinking mode. It'd be exhausting to constantly be thinking through every little thing to its fullest. It takes up a lot more time, and we'd probably become paralyzed with thought, or at least be incredibly slow at everything if we relied exclusively on slow thinking. Oftentimes we need to think quick, like if you encounter a bear, or if someone jumps out of a trash can, or if a bear jumps out of a trash can. We spend so much time in fast thinking mode, it makes sense that when we make decisions and judgments, we often rely on what are called heuristics, or mental shortcuts that we use to make decisions. These mental shortcuts are practical, efficient ways that we make decisions or solve problems or make judgments quickly. And though they might not be guaranteed to be perfect, they usually do the job pretty well. Two social psychological researchers named Kahneman and Tversky are famous for their work on researching heuristics and the errors that result from those heuristics, also known as biases, or the departures from that normative decision theory that says what we should do if we're fully rational. There are three basic heuristics that they identified in their work: representativeness, availability, and anchoring and adjustment. And these three heuristics have been a foundation for heuristics and biases research. Let's start with the representativeness heuristic, which is when we look at how much a situation or thing is representative of other things that we know or have experienced, or a prototype of an event or a thing, and then we guess the probability of something happening because of how similar it is to that prototype. In simpler terms, we compare stuff to other similar stuff and make decisions based on that similarity. Another way of saying it, if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, then it must be a duck. So if we don't have a lot of time to make a decision, it is helpful to use this heuristic in a situation where maybe you're lost in a dark alley and a man in a hockey mask approaches. So instead of asking him for directions, you're going to immediately use the prototype of Jason Voorhees and decide that it's best if you quickly get the fuck out of there. However, the representativeness heuristic is also prone to errors in judgment. For example, a bias that can happen as a result of the heuristic is stereotyping. Remember? A stereotype is a belief or an impression of a social group that people form by associating specific characteristics with the group. Or, in other words, it's an image of what social groups are like or what they do. The stereotype that women are less capable than men in leadership positions. It not only assumes that every woman is the same, but research has also found that there's no differences in leadership abilities between men and women. So statistical evidence doesn't support this belief. It's important for us to know more about stereotypes because once a stereotype exists, it influences how people think, how they feel, and how they act towards members of stereotyped groups. In other words, making quick automatic judgments about a person based on very little information can obviously cause some error. Next is the availability heuristic, which is when we have the tendency to rely on information that comes to our mind quickly and easily, or is most easily recalled in our minds. This is usually because of recency. It's in front of us, or we just experienced it, or our mood, or whatever. An example would be watching a documentary on plane crashes right before your plane ride that you're going on, and then thinking the likelihood of your plane is going to crash is much higher than it actually is. Why do I always watch the worst things before my trips? This is due to both the recency of the documentary watching, so it's fresh or accessible in your mind, but it's also due to the vividness of the story. Plane crashes are much more dramatic and covered in the media with more sensationalizing, so it sticks out on our brains more, and therefore it makes us think that it's more common than it actually is and more scary. The media is actually pretty powerful at influencing our use of this heuristic. And finally, we have the anchoring and adjustment heuristic, which is when we favor information that we encounter first, or we anchor on that first information and then we adjust to other information based on that original anchor. For example, it's easy for this to happen with judges at a diving competition. If the first diver does a front dive that is scored a 6 by a judge, and then the next diver goes up and also does a front dive, but maybe doesn't point their toes, point your damn toes! Then the judge is likely to use the first diver's score of 6 as an anchor, and then will adjust the score for the flat-footed front dive diver down to maybe like a 5.5 or a 5, which is why you always point your goddamn toes. Or let's say you're asked to judge the percentage of people in the world who are double jointed. You may start at an anchor based on the availability heuristic. Maybe what comes to mind quickly is your own double jointedness, and then your family's double jointedness, and maybe not knowing many people who aren't double jointed. Oh, and maybe you just watched a news story on double jointedness, so your initial anchor will likely be closer to that 100% mark as opposed to the 0% mark, and then you will adjust from there. So let's say that you settle with 75%. But does this heuristic help us to be accurate? Well, if you assume an anchor is close to the actual true value, then you'll probably be in a good spot, right? But the problem with this heuristic is if the anchor isn't close to the true value, then your adjustments will be closer to the incorrect anchor and will be further from the true value. So in this case, assuming that double jointedness is pretty common already, and anchoring near that 100% mark was not the way to go because it turns out that double jointedness is only in about 20% of people. Learning new things every day. Point your damn toes. As you may have noticed, the focus of these heuristics is mainly on the errors or the biases that are made from using them. But just because heuristics can cause us to make errors in judgment, that doesn't mean that we are stupid or lazy for using them. For the most part, we're actually pretty good at making appropriate judgments and decisions. I mean, humans have been around for a long time, so we're clearly doing something right. For example, a researcher named Gigerenzer did a study in which he compared heuristics to more complex statistical analyses. And what he found was that heuristics used to make decisions and judgments were often just as good, if not better, than the more complicated statistical calculations. And so he concluded that heuristics are not just energy saving, but also pretty good at making judgments and estimates. Another study shows how sometimes using careful and slow thinking in deciding what we want rather than just going with our fast thinking or our intuition can sometimes be bad for decision making. For example, one study had students pick between two types of posters. They were then asked to either give their reasoning for their choices or not asked to give their reasons. Those who did not speculate over their decisions were more satisfied with their choices and kept their posters longer than those who did speculate and think through their decision carefully. Similarly, another study had participants taste test various jams and rate them. It turns out that those who were not asked to think carefully to decide the ratings, compared to those who did think carefully about it, were just as accurate as experts in jam. What the fuck is a jam expert? That's my jam! These examples show that relying on careful consideration may not be the best in choice decisions. But overall, while heuristics are an efficient way to make decisions and judgments in a quick and economical manner, they aren't perfect or always accurate, as you've seen. And since we spend most of our time in that fast thinking mode, we use them a lot, which means that we have a tendency to produce errors in our judgments and decisions as a result of those heuristics. It's like using a USB mini fridge. Yeah, it was nice to keep my one drink a little bit colder than it would without it, but does it work better than an actual fridge? No, it just saved me a few steps to the kitchen at best, and it kind of stopped working after 10 minutes. Oh, fuck. So it's not that people are irrational. The quick and dirty heuristics that we use are generally sufficient for simple decisions and judgments that we need to make without a lot of time or effort. So I'd rather say that we are efficient, though not always effective. But luckily, just having an awareness of heuristics and biases can help us to recognize when we're using them and try to take ourselves out of that autopilot and into that slow thinking. Not slow, like not smart, like thoughtful thinking, you know what I mean. Because I explained it before, so, you got it. Yeah, that's it. I'm gonna shut up now. For more videos, find us on whatswithpeople.com and YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and all of those places. Bye! Do you guys hear the cars all the time? I get it, my audio's not great. Limited time only on Amazon, so probably not that limited of a time that you can buy it. You probably can buy it anytime. Decisions and judgments and decisions about judgments. We make our decisions. Decisions and judgments and make mistakes all the fucking time.
It's such a big sweatshirt and it's such